rats@chess.com, and I'm examining a game that was submitted by kkjchess. This is for my member best game thread. You can submit your best game or a game you lost that you want help with. Doesn't matter. I'll do an analysis. Almost got this thread caught up, and when I do, unfortunately, it's going to be locked down. So hurry up. Okay, because I got a lot of other things to do for the group. Okay, but I kept it open. I was going to close it a while ago, and I didn't. So we're still sneaking games in. All right. This was a turn-based game, online correspondence game, with a time limit of a move in 3 days. And it's also a thematic opening. In other words, you're given a starting position. You don't start from this position. You can choose to play, or you can choose not to play. I personally stay away from these. I don't see any point of playing a thematic opening. I usually, if I want to play something, I want to play it from my side, not from both sides. But anyway, this is the book position coming up right here. Okay, so it's the Staunton Gambit. White has gambited a pawn for development. Now he's trying to drive the knight away. Now let's just evaluate this for a second and see what's happening. Okay. White has made a pawn sacrifice. This pawn on e4 is a pawn that White would like to win back, but what White wants is development in return for that pawn. So g4 is more tactical and tricky in nature. Generally speaking, I don't know all the lines of the Staunton Gambit. In some cases, White will play f3, truly gambiting the pawn. So if Black takes on f3, White takes back with his knight. He has open lines for his queen and both bishops, where Black is sitting here with none of his bishops can even move yet. And for the pawn, Black has to try to catch up and not be left with a bad game that he can't defend. But g4 is certainly tactical in nature because it doesn't develop a piece. It weakens the White king side, but at the same time, it's threatening to wreak havoc on the Black position. Okay, pawn g5 could be a major pain. Where's the knight going to go? Well, I don't know this line. I'd never even seen this line to my knowledge before today. What can Black do here? Candidate moves. Well, you can play a move like h6, but that just seems anti-thematic. You're not developing anything. You're weakening your king side. If White manages to get a queen or bishop on g6, checkmate. Okay. The best way to meet this is, I think, Black plays the best move here. Before I show it, another candidate move is c6. Now why c6? Just so the knight can get to d5 when it's kicked. Okay. But I think the move that Black plays is correct. Okay. Why is this the correct move? Well, it immediately attacks this pawn. It holds on to with the Black has bishop and knight on that pawn. It holds on to the pawn on e4. It gets this bishop ready to develop and gives some breathing room for the queen. So Black needs to develop, right? So that's what that accomplishes. And now White's kind of committed to making this move. I don't know where book ends. Didn't really look it up. But Black comes up with this tactical reply. Now, you might look at this and say at first glance, maybe White can win some material here. The idea being, what about f3? See, f3, here, I'll go ahead and play it. But f3, what you have is two Black pieces under attack, okay? If one moves, the other one's gone. But there's some tactics here that are going to cost White dearly. You have to be able to analyze these out. You can see this and say, "Oh, I'm winning a piece," but you got to look at the whole thing. You got to examine the possibilities. And simplest way to analyze tactical possibilities is to consider the captures. For one, any other threatening moves we can make. But this capture is rather deadly for Black, because if now we've removed the threat on the bishop, if White tries to win his piece, he falls victim to a tactic, pawn f2 check, and see, it uncovers an attack on the queen. And when the king comes up and and takes the pawn, black wins the queen. And what's white going to do? He's basically, he can take the bishop. He can swish and zug and take on e7, but that helps black get developed. He could play f7 check, just to displace the king. But it doesn't matter. He's going to have to take back here. And the only piece both sides have, is kind of humorous, is their king. But black has a queen for 2 pieces, and that's a decisive advantage. The queen will defeat 2 pieces. It's just a matter of getting everything developed and turning the force loose of the extra material that black has, and white won't last all that long here. So obviously white can't go into this line just based on this much, but the question is, how much of this would you see? Would you consider, you have to, unless you know book, you'd have to solve this on your own. From this position, you say what to do. Well, let's see. You'd have to see d5, g5, so there's one move pair. You have to see this and this, that's the third move pair. And this should be enough to see. You can tell that white doesn't really have any development to do anything after winning the queen. So it's not all that deep of a combination to see. I think just about anybody who's got any practical experience with chess, even if they're still a beginner, and learning openings and learning tactics and various other things, could probably figure this out in a turn-based game, because you have 3 days to move. If you need to spend a few hours finding all this, so be it. Okay, so white doesn't bite with f3. White plays bishop e2, and this puts the question to the bishop, and black must make a decision here, and his move is pretty forced. If the bishop retreats, the knight on f6 is lost, so black is forced to trade on e2, and this does help white develop a little bit. So for his pawn, white is getting what he wants. He's getting some play. And I imagine this is still theory. Now the knight's shoved over to the side of the board. And let's stop and take stock for a moment. Okay, white has 2 pieces developed, black has 1. It's white's move. White's down a pawn, but again, he's got some development. So he's got to get all of his pieces out here and try and muster something up before black can consolidate and hold on to that pawn. White also has some weaknesses on the king side. f3 is a glaring weakness. A knight on f3 would be terrific, but it's not clear how that's going to happen. How's black going to get a knight there? He's got to get there by way of what? H4 or g5? How do we get to h4? Well, we get there by way of g6 or f5. Okay, so let's see. Knight to c6, move the pawn to e6. That's 2 moves. 3 moves to get the knight to e7. 4 moves to get it to f5. 5 moves to get it to h4. Finally, on the 6th move, we landed in there. But white gets 6 moves, and he'll probably find something creative to do in the meantime. Can this knight get there any quicker? It's not clear because it doesn't have any scope. Yeah, it can. 1 move g6. 2 to g7, 3 to f5, 4 to h4, and 5 moves. So this one gets there 1 move quicker. But even though we can't get a knight there, it's okay. All right. The fact that we can get a knight there means we'll just do it. If we need to do it, we'll do it at the right time. It's just probably not going to be now. Meanwhile, there's other squares that are weak inside the white camp. Let's just put them in with red. All these squares are weak, and it has to do with simply the fact that this pawn on g2 has gone up to g5. So white's got a lot of Swiss cheese problems on his king side, but at the same time, black has no development. So, and then one piece he has develops off to the side of the board. Okay, so white develops a piece, and black does the same. And this is good. It takes command of this diagonal. There's no here, lost the arrow. Takes command of come back here. Okay, takes command of this diagonal. As I mentioned, those are all weak squares, but black doesn't really have a lot working with that queen, so the queen's not going to do any, probably won't do any damage by itself. Now, what should white do here? Probably the simplest thing to do is develop the queen and castle queenside. That's probably the simplest thing. White's 2 moves from doing that. Black can in turn castle queenside. There's not much white can do to stop it. But white still comes up with an interesting move here. Attacks the knight. Now how's it's double attack on the knight. Black's pretty much forced to exchange here, because g6 is just going to lose a pawn with check. g6, knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, h5 check. So this pretty much forces black to make this capture. Now, for what it's worth, white has an open H file to operate on. So chances are black doesn't want to castle kingside and walk right into all kinds of problems over there. So, but this plan did cost white a little bit of time, and he has traded off one of his developed pieces. So black starts catching up in development. And here I think white made the critical error. He locked up the king side. Again, what white should do is develop his queen. It could go to d2, it could go to e2, and get ready to castle long, and then pile up on that weak pawn on h7, double the rooks on the h file, and make black come up with a plan. But what white does is just a little too premature. He plays g6, and you know this. It's ambitious. You're basically saying I'm threatening to play rook takes pawn, and if you take my rook, I'm going to take back with my pawn. I'm getting ready to make a queen. But black has some resources against that. Queen h3 for 1, attacking the pawn. But and naturally black can't take on g6. He's going to drop a rook. But what happens? This just basically locks up the king side, and white doesn't have a heck of a lot to show for this. What he probably should do now is just go ahead and play g4. Okay, the purpose of g4 is that you want to play g5 next, and that might not have been a bad idea. Let's take a look. g4. Okay, what's black going to do? Well, one thing he's got to do is get developed. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Let's castle, and now comes the thematic g5. Okay, now black needs to. He can't take the pawn. He needs to come up to e6 so this bishop can get developed, and white needs to finish his development too. So let's put the queen on e2. Now it's interesting, if black develops this bishop, he may lose a pawn to pawn takes, and maybe this pawn will get dangerous. Black may have to maneuver a little bit here. White might actually have some compensation. I'll leave this to black to sit down and figure out what he would have done against that. Of course, the queen doesn't have to go to e2. It can go to d2. That's a whole different line. Of course, maybe then black has some ideas with knight a5 to c4, and if b3, that weakens c3, and then maybe get this bishop into pin it. You know, I don't know. It's at some point black may play queen e8. White needs to be able to hold on to that pawn. He can't afford to lose it. That's one reason for keeping it on e2. Then the queen could come up here. But I don't know. Let's see. If bishop d6, okay, we're going to go ahead and take. Now, got to strike while the iron's hot here, so to speak. Do we want to take that rook? I don't know. Or do we want to try to counterattack that pawn. I don't know. It looks like white can probably hold on to that pawn. I don't know. White's doing okay here. What am I missing? You know, first I was thinking g6 wasn't any good, but if he follows up with g5 or g4 with the idea of g5, what does black do? Black may have to return the pawn here. I'll show you how. Okay, on g5 you answer with h5 and you give the pawn back. Okay, so rook takes, now queen takes. Now black must complete his development, and so must white. And let's see where we're going to put the bishop. Let's try b4. And I suppose white should get on that open h file, and black should get this knight over to f5. That's a good square. Could take the knight off too, and I don't know. Hard to say what's happening here. It doesn't look like white gets in trouble here. He ends up getting in trouble in a hurry in the game continuation. So, you know, g6 may have been premature, maybe it wasn't. You know, this puts the question to black. Instead, white stops and moves a piece a second time in the open. Whoops. Moves this piece again. Bishop to f4. It had just gone to e3 a few moves ago. Now it's coming to f4. What's he trying to do? Play knight b4? Well, black needn't worry about that. He can prevent things. If anything, he can go play one of those moves like a6, which is not as bad as it might seem. Although it's e6 would be preferable. It's putting a pawn on the opposite color of the bishop of the remaining bishops. Anyway, whoops, did he castle here? This way the PGN works. Sometimes things get distorted. I guess that's what he played. Now I'm wondering what about knight b5 right now? Might have to play e5. And there's some tactics here, potential tactics. If anything, we can stop and give a check and drop the bishop back so it holds c7, and we figure we'll surround and win this pawn on e5, and that black is caught up in his development and should be okay. Now the trick of e6 doesn't work because we have c7 covered. I don't know. It's interesting. Interesting line. Looked okay that black survived that. Okay, so white played queen h5, which indirectly has some pressure on d5, but it's covered, and this just helps black catch up in development. And white offers black offers a bishop trade. I'm not sure offering a bishop trade is the best. This is the kind of ending you want: either your bishop versus your opponent's knight, or your knight versus your opponent's bishop, or your bishop versus his bishop. So the one thing you don't want to trade in minor pieces is bishops. It works out in this case that he doesn't trade, but it wouldn't have been a bad choice to trade. So sometimes you can think about this when you have two minor pieces, bishop and knight. You can say which endings are most favorable for me, and I just said what they were. Knight versus bishop, bishop versus knight, and bishop versus bishop. If you look at my video lessons too, the first game I showed on that, I had a similar choice. We had a rook and a knight and bishop each, and I was considering the possible minor piece endings we could eventually trade into, and the choices matched. My bishop versus his bishop was fine. My bishop versus his knight was fine. My knight versus his bishop, everything except knight versus knight was least favorable. So here black is voluntarily saying uh, you can have a knight ending, or potential knight ending. It's not a knight ending with queens and rooks on, but what else could black have done here? Well, bishop b4 for one, which he's going to end up doing a little bit, and we're happy to trade that dark squared bishop for that knight. Although one drawback going into a bishop versus knight versus bishop ending is g7 is a little weak. We got to make sure we don't have a problem there. So we'll forgive, for that reason, we'll forgive bishop d6. But white declines to trade, and black starts redeploying his knight. And now this bishop just can't find a home, so now it goes to g5. And it's kind of a cute little move. Black can't afford to take because pawn takes will be met with queen takes, rook, and then after rook takes and rook takes check, here I'll just show you. Black's going to have to cough up some material to get out of check. Okay, it's going to have to cough up a lot of material. The only way to do it is to play queen d8. If you play knight g8, the rook just takes it with check, and then you get to, if you want, you can give the bishop too, but you don't want that. So basically this would force this position, and white is quite happy here. He's up the exchange, or the quality as it's known in other parts of the world. So it's a good move by white to play bishop g5. Of course, you can't count on your opponent to go into a line like that, so black smells a rat, and parks his rook here and gets the open file. Since that rook can move, now was the time to do it. And here white parts with the bishop. Might not have been a bad idea. That knight was going to f5, which is a nice square. But as I said earlier, our bishop versus his knight is fine. We're black here. We're happy with that. So white covers his weakness on f2, and black goes and pins that knight. Now he's going to force some doubling of the pawns. So white tries to wiggle free, unpins the knight, but it's too late. Down it comes, and here comes the check, and suddenly white is in serious trouble. If the king goes to b1, rook d6 is just deadly. White has no defense, and I'll show you. If king b1, rook here, and the threat is to check and then mate. So got to get away from that, so you can answer rook b6 with rook b1. But the problem, the fly in the ointment, is this, and we just force the king back, and then we check and give mate. So, case closed. It's over, done with. So, white must come out in the open. Oops, wrong way. He must bring his king out into the center, and now, because of those weaknesses that were wrought from the beginning, there it is. I mentioned earlier f3 was weak, and we were talking about getting a knight in there, which we couldn't do, but a rook in there is even more effective. Look at that pressure on the third rank. White basically has no defense here. All he can do is play king e1 and try to run the king, but I'm not sure if he can. Let's see. If king e1, nothing wrong with taking a pawn with check. And if we can't find anything else better to do, there's another pawn, and there's no counterplay by white. I would say game over soon. So white tries rook e3 to stop the third rank, but that unfortunately weakens the second rank, and now things just start falling, and white has no defense here. There's none. And the other rook comes into play. This is getting ugly in a hurry. And ouch, that queen check its forced mate. So White had some chances in there. He had to make a mistake for Black to win. Black was able to equalize the opening, and White's one chance was to follow up with G4 and G5 and make Black think. But anyway, it was a good game by Black. I'm sure you have a lot to be proud of. I know you have a lot to be proud of the way you finished this one off. Not only is there a checkmate on the board and a rook ahead, but look at the pawns. I mean, Black's up. Black still got all 8 pawns. Is that true? Yeah, Black has all 8 pawns. He's 5 pawns ahead. How often do you see yourself with 8 of your pawns at move 27 and the position not be locked? It's kind of rare. But anyway, thanks everyone for their time, and take care.